Welcome back, and thank you for joining us again. We certainly want to talk to Nova Cadamatre, who's a master of wine and a winemaker, so that we can have a better sense of what carbonic maceration really is and what it does to the wine. But you know what? If we're going to make wine, we got to start with grapes, right? Ah, yes, harvest time. Yes, while we view harvest as a bucolic, charming, even quaint moment of tradition and celebration, can we be honest? This is somebody's business, someone's livelihood, many someone's. Top producers use cautious methods, though they add to the expense of winemaking because a better wine is supposed to earn a better price. So you spend money on teams to clean up the grapes because that's one of the ways Beaujolais has improved, and how you make the best Gamay in France. The Gamay grape is the seventh most planted red in the country and authorized in almost every area except Bordeaux, Alsace, and Corsica. Its official name is Gamay Noir à Jus Blanc to differentiate it from Gamay Teinturier de Beauce, which is a red juiced grape that's probably a mutation because these things happen in grape growing. And while Philip the Bold clearly had issues with Gamay when he outlawed it in 1395, it's true that Gamay rarely makes as noble a wine as Pinot Noir. So ripping out Gamay for the more rarefied grape probably made sense if you're a nobleman who really doesn't give two hoots whether your people can grow enough grapes to survive year after year. Humph! Peasants, I'm sure he said, though it's not written down as such. People grew Gamay because they could assure themselves of a crop far more frequently than if they grew Pinot Noir. So, people kept growing it, making it. And since the 1960s and 1970s, a few producers have taken seriously the promise offered by the region's best vineyards. Over the last 10 or 20 years, buyers have noticed, and now there are dozens, maybe even many dozens, who have helped Gamay gain notoriety. The old methods, which were frankly set aside to make cheap and cheerful wine for a time, are now much in demand. Using solely carbonic maceration is not really the way to high quality, and most don't use it. They use what we call semi-carbonic maceration. Some even use whole cluster, and others might even destem their grapes like they do in Burgundy. Maybe we should talk to a real winemaker about this, someone like Nova Cadamatre.
With any carbonic maceration, typically you're going to see more ester formation. So, like things like bananas and very intense fruit, sometimes like a bubblegum candy thing. So, the difference between full carbonic and semi carbonic. So, full carbonic, you're actually evacuating the entire tank with CO2 before you put any of the fruit in, and you're putting all the fruit in with basically whole cluster. Now, with the fruit going in the tank, depending on how large the tank is and how much volume of fruit you have, you are going to have some crushing at the bottom. The key difference between full carbonic maceration and semi-carbonic maceration is that evacuation of the tank prior to putting any fruit in the tank. Semi-carbonic is basically you're putting the fruit in the tank, you're allowing that fruit that's on the bottom to release juice. That juice starts to ferment with natural yeast on the grapes, and that naturally creates its own CO2 to evacuate the rest of the tank. So basically, the top of the tank, maybe the middle three-quarters of the tank, are whole clusters that will undergo this enzymatic reaction. And basically, that's what you're looking for in carbonic maceration is an intercellular enzymatic reaction, not an alcoholic fermentation, which is driven by yeast. So it's really the grapes itself and the enzymes present within the skins that are breaking the skins down, and not a microbial activity, which is what you see in alcoholic fermentation. And so that really is the key difference between full carbonic and semi-carbonic, which is why most of the time the flavors are really, really similar. So I would not go out on a limb and say, oh, this is, semi-carbonic versus full carbonic just by tasting the wine. So that's the difference between those two. Now, whole cluster is a little bit different because when you're in carbonic maceration, you want to leave that fruit alone. You want to leave the skins alone and the juice alone and everything so that that intercellular reaction can take place without being disturbed. So whole cluster is a little bit different. You're starting off the same. You're putting all this whole bunches into a tank, but through a whole cluster fermentation, you're going to see that crushing at the bottom. You're going to see a fermentation start, but you're also going to be doing pump overs and cap management. And in, Pinot Noir, usually that's a punch down, so you're doing more aggressive management of the tank. And so that's going to give you more traditional flavors versus those really estery free characters. You're also going to see a darker color in whole cluster fermentation, whereas the carbonic maceration, because you're not doing the pump overs, it's not extracting as much color as you would see with a truly managed fermentation with the cap management and everything. And then you're going to complete that fermentation to dryness, whereas with a carbonic maceration fermentation, once this carbonic is done, you're going to press it off, but there's really not going to be that much alcohol. There's going to be a lot of sugar left. And so then you basically treat it like a white wine. You press it, you stick it in a tank, and off it goes on its alcoholic fermentation to finish that out. But you still, if you keep that really cool, you can still keep all those esters and flavors from the carbonic part of the maceration. Low. That's really, it's not a fermentation. I mean, we kind of call it a fermentation, but it's really not a true fermentation. It's a breakdown and almost a decay of the cellular structures within the berries. But the most impact that I see from whole cluster is really from the aromatic characteristics of the stems being included, and also the tannin structure, because you're getting more tannin from the stems versus the skins and the seeds. And so that really has a key difference in texture of the wine. So, and then the aromatics from a whole cluster fermentation, they seem to go more, it's more spicy, like you get more like a dark spiciness, and then a slight herbal edge to it, but not like a negative herbal, more like a dry herb type situation. And so for me, those are kind of the key distinguishing characteristics of whole cluster fermentation, is that spiciness and the tannin structure, because it does tend to be a more, I call it a stemmy tannin, but not in a bad way. And then the differences between carbonic is that like really effusive fruit esters and things.
Thank you for watching. When you come back, we're going to talk to Laura De Pasquale, who's a master sommelier in Florida and wants to talk to us about people's changing perception of Beaujolais.